And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Merry Christmas! I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Christmas Day 2024. And we start out with the sea ice. Ice has really grown across the far north and through the Chukchi Sea. We've had strong winds out of the northeast and north, so some polynyas have opened up along the west side of the Seward Peninsula, eastern northeast part of Norton Sound, and between Kivalina and Point Hope. But overall, we have colder Arctic air coming in from Siberia. It will be overspreading the north slope, including the Seward Peninsula and into the central interior by the time we get through this weekend. So ice growth will continue, and there will be more of an expansion southward, especially on the south side of St. Lawrence Island. Also, with the brisk north winds, there will be a tendency for the ice to drift southward as well. Temperature is not quite as cold down here around Bristol Bay. You can see the lack of ice development there. But again, the bulk of these north winds have been out right through the central portion of the Bering and then across the Aleutians. And as a result, we are seeing in the open water any openings, polynyas or on the ice edge and beyond into the open sea, potential for heavier freezing spray in this pattern. So the weather map late tonight into Thursday morning, we have kind of a double barrel low in the central Gulf that's going to be heading back toward the west-northwest, toward the east side of the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound by the time we get into early Friday morning. And this system will spread a little bit of light snow, perhaps all the way into the Anchorage Bowl, lower portion of the Mat-Su Valley, which would be some of the first accumulating snow for Anchorage in a while. Could impact travel on roads and things. Not a lot of snow, but we just haven't seen it recently. And then for areas along the Panhandle, continuation of breezy conditions along with mainly rain in coastal areas or lower elevations as temperatures are warm enough. But here, that colder air is plunged all the way across the Aleutian chain. We're expecting lows tonight, central Aleutians to be in the upper 20s. And further north, we're going to see air temperatures dip into the single digits of just above zero at Savunga, and then even colder temperatures following here through the weekend. So tomorrow, Thursday, we have the low pulling back toward the western Gulf. The stationary front divides the beginning of the Arctic air, and the really cold Arctic air is out here over Siberia. And then by the time we get into Friday, there's going to be another low coming up out of the North Pacific that could impact the Panhandle with additional precipitation and breezy conditions. This front will make a little progress south and east, and colder air is going to pour in across areas of the western and northern mainland early in the weekend. Seward Peninsula and up here through the Brooks Range North Slope, all along the Arctic coast, sub-zero temperatures in the 20s, even some getting colder than 30 below, and that will have a tendency to expand a little further east and southeastward through the course of the weekend. So the marine forecast for Thursday: south winds 20 knots there, Dixon Entrance at least around Metlakatla and Ketchikan, with waves upwards of 8-10 feet. Southeast to south winds 25 to 30 knots, Stevens Passage to Lynn Canal, though Lynn Canal could have gusts up to 45 knot gale force winds. And then for areas from outside of Gustavus southward, look for south to southwest 35 knot gales with gusts up to 50 knots off of Craig there, off of the Prince of Wales Island. But then further east, or as we go further north rather, easterly winds around 15 knots there at Cape Suckling. And for the day Friday, winds will be southeast at Stevens Passage, Dixon Entrance 20 knots, still some 10-foot waves there in Dixon Entrance, 4 feet there, Stevens Passage. Northeast winds 20 knots, 3-foot waves there within Lynn Canal. The outer coast, southeast to east winds right around 20 knots, though gust to 35 knots possible south of Sitka, and waves generally running 14 to 16 feet. For the northwestern Gulf, Prince William Sound, northeast winds 10 knots, 2-foot waves. Northeast winds outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance 15 knots with 12 to 14-foot waves. And then variable winds off the Kenai coast and the northern parts of Cook Inlet to 10 knots. And as we drop down through the lower Cook Inlet, winds will be northwesterly 15 knots with waves 3 feet. On Friday, across much of the region, starting with Cook Inlet, we're looking at northeast to north winds, upper middle Cook Inlet, and then shifting northwest, lower Cook Inlet out of Kamishak Bay. Waves a few feet there within middle and lower Cook Inlet. Northeast winds 10 knots within Prince William Sound, waves a couple of feet. And then outside of Hinchinbrook entrance, easterly winds 20 knots, waves 8 to 10 feet. For areas of Kodiak Island and extending down along the Alaska Peninsula on Thursday, variable winds around 10 knots, including Shelikof Strait and most of the peninsula. Winds will turn a little more northwest to northerly at 15 knots either side there, Cold Bay and False Pass. Waves 7 to 11 feet on the North Pacific side, generally 2 to 4 feet on the Bering side, though as high as 7 feet there north of Cold Bay. And then by the time we get into Friday, winds become more northerly, 15 knots or so the upper peninsula area and Shelikof Strait, and then 20 to 25 knots as we trail out along the south end of the peninsula. Waves around 6 feet in the North Pacific side and 4 to 6, maybe as high as 9 feet there again north of Cold Bay. Still brisk winds on Thursday across the Aleutians, though coming down from what they were this Christmas Day. Northerly winds 25 to 30 knots throughout the eastern and central Aleutians, turning back to the northwest at about 20 knots there, Kiska westward through Shemya. Then on Friday, winds will be north-northwest 25 to 30 knots over the eastern Aleutians, westerly 20 knots, middle Aleutians, Atka and Adak, and then turning back south to southeasterly, increasing 30 to 35 knots, especially from Kiska to Shemya as the next couple of lows will be approaching from the southwest there. And still, we have gale force winds on the along the lower Yukon Delta for Thursday. Northerly winds of 35 knots, also northerly gales of 35 knots at St. Matthew. 30-knot winds out of Kuskokwim Bay and the Pribilofs. Waves out in the open areas here of the Bering will be running as much as, say, 12 to 15 feet, and you're going to have also the threat of heavy freezing spray. And then for Friday, winds will be generally northerly across most of the shoreline there, from Norton Sound all the way out of Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays. Could be as high as 25-knot north winds out of Kuskokwim Bay, as well as over toward the Pribilofs. But within Norton Sound and along the lower Yukon coast there off of Imanik and Hooper Bay, generally north winds at 15 knots with that ice in place. And again, the northerly winds will help to push that ice further southward. And then through the Bering Strait on Thursday and north side of St. Lawrence, west side of the Seward Peninsula, 35-knot northerly gale, still some blowing snow and shifting of ice as a result of those stronger winds. Winds through the lower Chukchi Sea fall off to 25 and then 10 knots as we get up north of from around and north of Point Lay to Utqiagvik, and then generally along the Arctic coast there from Wainwright to Kaktovik. Winds will be out of the northeast at 10 to 15 knots. Those winds are going to turn more westerly along the Beaufort Sea coastline on Friday, as much as 30 knots from the west there at Kaktovik, and northwesterly 15 knots Utqiagvik down toward Wainwright and Point Lay. And then as we go through the lower portion of the Chukchi Sea, look for north winds around 20 knots passing through the Bering Strait. But plenty of ice continues to thicken as a result of that Arctic air that will be seeping in from Siberia and just entrenching itself here for the weekend over the Seward Peninsula, all across the North Slope, Brooks Range, and spilling into the middle and eventually upper Yukon Valley. So everyone, I hope you've had a Merry Christmas, and we want to wish you an early Happy New Year.